everybody. It is so nice to see this group. I'm always fascinated with the power of the internet and bringing people from all different continents together. This is so exciting to have all these amazing researchers from Brazil here today. Um, so let's see who would like to ask the first question.
So I have a question for each person, but I'll wait. If there's other questions, let them go first. So then
No, let's have you start with the first
go ahead.
question.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So first, thank you. This was fantastic for me. I'm so glad to see you all. I'm so grateful that we were able to be here. And I'm writing actually a book on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the Indian Constitution, and it's very hard to explain when you look at the Indian Constitution today what he had envisioned, because I talk about the Indian Constitutional as having this potential for transformative potential, and yet, like our former speaker, most people will say, and don't start, if you're going to talk about social transformation, you don't start with the Constitution because there's nothing there. And that's historically because of what happened since Ambedkar left. And because in a way, I think that what I see in the Brazilian Constitution is what he in fact envisioned for the Indian Constitution, which he couldn't pass through because he was never really an insider in the Congress Party. So I'm fascinated with how also these principles in the Brazilian Constitution are taking root in a way that provides protections that we're seeing dismantled in the United States. So I wanted to just ask about that. So I have one question for each of you. And so Bruna, for yours, as you speak about the impacts of discrimination among genders, it's interesting. It reminds me of what Justice Ginsburg, when she was creating a jurisprudence around gender discrimination, would focus on, in fact, the discrimination against men when you created categorical categories in which there were discriminatory policies because those categories tended to be gendered. So she would always, where you can, start with looking for the discrimination, look for a male plaintiff, for example, to say this is where the discrimination is, to get more public support. So I wonder is there more public support around this convention? Do you think it's easier because, in fact, the discrimination that's there now, or the sort of protection that's missing, in fact, is around the paternity leave, and you're trying to equalize. So I wonder if it's easier then in some way to get public support around realizing the inequality, because you're seeing sort of that dimension, you're seeing what's missing in the paternity leave. So that was my one question for you on that, but it's really, really fascinating. Adilson, I'm fascinated with everything you write. I'm also talking about this comparative context of affirmative action, and what's most troubling for me with the current Supreme Court decision, as you say, is that is all they do is refer to Brown versus Board of Education in dismantling what Brown versus Board of Education, in fact, was sort of symbolically understood to represent. And they do it by using, you said, the rhetoric of cordial race relations and this kind of liberal rhetoric of meritocracy and a colorblind constitution. That's all they do throughout and I think that's so dangerous because it's such an alluring concept to people. Like they right away kind of latch onto it. The problem with the Supreme Court is also, the way they rewrite history in doing so. I wonder what is, like, at least in the United States, what is a way for us to get the public to understand that, in fact, it's the hypocrisy and the rewriting of history that's not what the 14th Amendment stood for. They're rewriting and so if you look at the dissenting opinion, of course, you see that, and also they allow these exceptions. So, for example, when it comes to profiling at the borders, looking like a Mexican is not a problem when it comes to the equal protection, because it's profiling, right? And so anybody who really you can sort of make the case against them that so much of this is just partisan, is just partisan advocacy. But it's so alluring for them to refer to Brown versus Board of Education as they dismantle affirmative action. And that's left for us? So I'm a commissioner now on the Connecticut Commission for Human Rights and Opportunities. And that's left in states that have very robust affirmative action policies is to wonder whether or not, because race is a protected class and they can potentially dismantle policies focused on race, we're not sure whether at some point we will be allowed to have very robust policies that protect, for example, from disability, from sexual orientation, which they wouldn't go after. But because race is a protected class, we may not be able to have race. as we may not be able to affirmative action plans in the state on race because they've turned the equal protection clause on its head and they've turned that protected class status on its head. So I know this is a lot about the US Constitution, but I always think about the comparison. Just your thoughts on how we move forward, given that they're using that rhetoric of meritocracy and that same kind of rhetoric of the colorblind Constitution to dismantle historically what was there to protect the most oppressed groups through this protected class status. So that's my question. And then Milena, for you, the question, when you're talking about the need for affirmative action in well, two things. One, I just actually talked about the right to education too, and I wonder if we're not thinking about education. I'm arguing that there's two clauses in the UDHR. The second clause talks about the substantive education. The first one is just procedural about accessing education, non-discrimination. But I think globally we're sort of losing the focus on the substantive education, which was to develop the human personality. And even in the United States, for example, where you've now you're privatizing education, that you don't even think about education as a public good in that same way anymore. I think it kind of violates that second clause. So, is there a way we need to be thinking about education more broadly? And then your point about affirmative action in civil service. One of the strategies of the Black Lives Matter movement has been to sort of put people in key positions to build up that process, like putting, especially in the judicial system, to create opportunities for judges. So is there some support that you see, like constitutionally, that perhaps we can? I don't even know where to go because we don't have those constitutional protections in the United States. But how central do you think the protections in the Brazilian Constitution have been to allow for that pipeline? And is that pipeline actually coming through now? Is what I want to know. And at some point it would be nice to see whether or not that actually makes a difference, which I imagine it will. So I'll leave it those three questions.
Excuse me, can I have to leave at 3, so can I ask you answer your question first?
Of course.
Okay, Professor Sujata, I am working on a book. Actually, I have just finished a book called Women, Race, and Law, Black Feminism as Progressive Constitutional Politics. And it's interesting to see how the public rhetoric of race and history in Brazil and in the United States differ significantly over the last 30, 40 years. So Brazilian white elites, academic, political, legal elites have consistently resorted to this idea of the Brazilian history as logical, direct fact trajectory through race transcendence because of racial mixing, because we supposedly have a less violent slavery in Brazil, and because of racial mixing also transformed the ideas, impacted race relations, and allowed Brazil to have a different racial history from the United States. And what has been an important role of Black feminists in Brazil since the late 70s, and especially from the late 80s onwards, was actually to challenge this historic narrative. So Black feminists, like grassroots movement, have consistently challenged the idea, this representation of Brazil as a racial democracy, as the Brazilian history has challenged this idea of racial cordiality as an essential trait of Brazilian public morality throughout Brazilian history. Quite the contrary, the Black movement have actually, in a certain extent, successfully changed the political discussion about race and history, and it's interesting to see how Brazilian courts have, in a certain way, adopted this this social movement has actually influenced the ways in which Brazilian courts address the question of discrimination in general, because they take context into consideration. So you can see a very clear development in Brazil when courts are talking about racially, historically disadvantaged group. No, we need to take into consideration the whole history of this country, of this particular social group. And what's happening in the United States is that whites are certain segments of the white population have, in the last 30, 40 years, tried to, as you mentioned, rewrite, okay, and not only rewrite, to mobilize these arguments against against affirmative action and against all sorts of inclusive policies. And I do not have a complex and direct answer to your question, but I think it's very important to challenge. I think a collective challenge of the current strategies of the liberal right and the right wing's individuals against, for instance, against critical race theory, against this whole strategy of presenting whites as a minority group, as a disadvantaged group, against this whole idea of affirmative action as a discriminatory policy. Of course, this is something that still exists in Brazil, but the Black movement, and I would say Black feminists, especially in the last 5 years in Brazil, they have been so influential. They have really attacked and successfully attacked this whole rhetoric, and actually help to rewrite or to transform social understanding of race relations in Brazil. So I think that the history of Black feminism in Brazil, it's an interesting way to understand how social movements, progressive social movements, can create strategies to understand the logic and also to challenge discourses against racial inclusion and this sort of thing.
And I think we have 2 minutes left. So, and we can keep this discussion also afterwards. But if you girls would like also to give a little quick answer.
And I mean, I look forward to the book. So I look forward to it.
Yes. When is the book coming out?
In 2 weeks, actually.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. Bruna.
Okay, thank you, Tati. Thank you so much for your questions, Sujata. I will be very brief, and especially because I definitely don't have a clear answer, because you asked mainly, if I'm not wrong, about the probable support that we might have to have this convention ratified, and maybe the change of our internal law to have something like the parental leave applying in Brazil. And I hope that we have this current support now. We have a government that has been talking more about social rights and human rights, and the discussion is growing in this subject. But sometimes I feel like everything can change. But at the same time, the society right now, I feel that it's looking more at the ways that men and women can collaborate, or actually how they have to collaborate at home. We have some companies in Brazil and all over the world actually, but in Brazil also, that are implementing new forms of paternity leaves that the state is not enforcing it, but the society itself is trying to make it a better place, a better environment for everyone. So I think that we are probably on the way for this to change, but unfortunately, I am not currently so hopeful in our government. I hope so, but I don't know, since we have so many problems currently, so many changes in our Supreme Court as well. So I'm not sure, but let's hope. I think that's all I can give. I'm sorry.
Yes, thank you so much. And Milena.
So thank you also, Professor Sujata, for the question. And as the others, Professor Sujata always asks very difficult questions that are that have a level of complexity that it's so hard for us to materialize, put in our real world. So regarding education, we also have this problem, as education seems to have lost this meaning of being the construction of the human personality, the construction of the citizen, where you understand who you are, your place in the world, your place in your society. So we also have this problem here. We also have the private schools problem. Mostly the best schools for the basic schools are private, and public schools, just a few of them have good content, are good to the students to achieve bigger places. So here more broadly, we are struggling to achieve education. Bruna also studies education and children's rights. So I don't know if she can back me up here, that we have the difficulty, and it's hard to achieve this ideal education as a broadly public intent of social development. And for putting people into traditional systems, in places in traditional systems, Black people, our constitution have the support actually, but putting it in practice is our biggest problem. So as we have vulnerable people in public schools, they unfortunately don't have the quality to bring most of those people into good colleges, and those good colleges can bring those people into important places where they can push other people like them to those places also. And I always like to use our Supreme Court example, because for us is one of the most higher places. And we had this year one, how can I say, I forgot the word in English, sorry, one retirement already in our Supreme Court. And feminist people and black people try to do all this work so we could have a Black person or a woman in this place. No, we have one more white man, and now we had another retirement of a woman, and we are trying one more time to bring a woman, a Black person, a Black woman. People are basically fighting for a Black woman, but it all indicates that we will have another white man. So we have constitutional support and as Bruna said, I have hope, but I'm not so very optimistic that we can practice this. So that's why we keep telling this seems basic, but we have to keep saying it because it exists. We have it as a constitutional right, but it's hard for us to put it in practice, to see it happening in our country. I'm sorry that I cannot do it more broadly, but I believe that with our time and
yeah, and thank you so much for
Thank
keep
you.
pushing the
Thank
issue
you.
and for the work that you do. Yes, and thank you again for the invitation. It was wonderful to be here today. And